I never thought my life would come to this. Not when I was a little girl, perched on my dad's lap, the scent of sawdust and Old Spice clinging to him, watching him and his best friend Ken crack jokes over lukewarm beers and sizzling barbecues. Their laughter was a soundtrack to my childhood, a comforting rumble that promised safety and a future as bright as those summer afternoons. Not even when the heavy doors of the university registrar's office clicked shut behind me, sealing my fate as a dropout, the shame a cold, tight knot in my stomach, with no one left to turn to, or so I believed. But that's the insidious thing about rock bottom. You rarely recognize the jagged edges and the suffocating darkness until it's already pulling you under, the weight of it crushing the air from your lungs. It started, as these things often do, with a seemingly innocuous message, a digital lifeline tossed into the churning waters of my despair. Uncle Ken, my dad's childhood confidant, the man whose shoulders were once my parade float at countless family parties, the one who always slipped me an extra biscuit when mom wasn't looking, reached out one bleak night. He'd seen a desperate, thinly veiled post I'd made on a local job forum. My pride eroded to the point of public pleading. I was a hollow shell of my former self, exhausted from sleepless nights spent staring at the ceiling, humiliated by the constant rejection, and so broke that the gnawing hunger in my belly had become a familiar companion. My younger brother, Daniel, needed his epilepsy medication, a constant, terrifying reminder of our precarious situation. The pharmacist's sympathetic but firm refusal to extend more credit echoed in my ears. I hadn't eaten a proper meal in days, surviving on stale bread and the dregs of instant coffee. My phone, my only link to potential work or help, was a ticking time bomb, the bill glaringly past due. My own father, the man I once idolized, had met my pleas with his stony silence, then a lecture. "You need to learn some responsibility, Sarah," he'd said, his voice devoid of the warmth I craved, his words like a slap. "This is the real world." Ken, in stark contrast, was a balm to my raw nerves. His messages were warm, infused with an understanding that felt almost too complete, too knowing. He reminisced about my childhood, about simpler times, his words painting a picture of a life I barely recognized anymore. He offered dinner, a proper meal at a quiet restaurant where the clinking of cutlery wasn't drowned out by the frantic thumping of my own heart. Then a bit of money, just to help out for Daniel's sake, he'd said, pressing a folded bill into my hand as he dropped me off. I told myself it was innocent, a kind gesture from an old family friend. I told myself I was strong enough, desperate enough to draw the line, to keep the transaction clean. I didn't. I couldn't. The first time we had sex, in a sterile, anonymous hotel room where the air hung thick with the chemical tang of bleach and the stale scent of countless other horrid encounters, the cheap polyester sheets scratching against my skin like a penance. Afterward, I cried in the shower, the water scalding, then chilling, each droplet a futile attempt to wash away a shame that felt tattooed onto my soul. I scrubbed until I was raw, promising the tear-streaked face in the fogged-up mirror that it would be the last time. A one-off, a desperate measure for a desperate situation. But then the money came. Not in a lump sum that felt like a dirty transaction, but quietly, casually, like an allowance. Envelopes tucked into my bag when he dropped me off. Bank transfers with vague, almost innocuous references like gift or thanks for dinner. It was enough to keep the wolves from the door, to buy Daniel's medication, to put food on the table. I started to need him, or rather, what he provided. Not for love, God no, and not even for the fleeting comfort of human touch, just to survive. And as my dependence grew, so did his requests. Photos, videos, explicit, degrading things I'd never imagined sharing with anyone, let alone a man who was practically family. At first, a raw, primal part of me recoiled. I can't, Ken, please, I'd stammer, the words catching in my throat, the last vestiges of my dignity clinging on. But then his voice, smooth and patient, would weave its way through my defenses, subtly reminding me of Daniel's dwindling medication supply, the red-inked final notice from the landlord peeking from my bag, or the simple, brutal offer of double the usual amount. A cold calculation would begin in the recesses of my mind. How many more lines could I cross when survival felt like the only imperative? I began to send him nude pictures late at night, the flash of my phone camera illuminating my strained smile and the deadness in my eyes. I learned to angle my body, to use the shadows to hide the parts of myself I still wanted to keep private, though there were fewer of those with each passing day. And I hated myself for how easy it became, how the sharp edges of shame dulled into a numb, aching resignation. The disgust was still there, a bitter taste in my mouth, but it was a familiar poison now. Until everything, inevitably, spectacularly, crashed. One dreary afternoon, the kind where the gray sky mirrors the landscape of your soul, Ken sent me money with a message. More tomorrow, video this time, something special. My fingers, almost on autopilot, typed out something vaguely flirtatious, a practiced response designed to keep the money flowing. I attached a nude picture I'd taken earlier that evening, topless, stretched out on my threadbare bed, a pathetic attempt at seduction. What I didn't know, what I couldn't have possibly fathomed in my self-absorbed misery, was that his phone was linked to his iPad, an iPad he'd casually taken with him when he went to see my dad that very afternoon. They had been working on some community projects together, something about a local park renovation, the kind of wholesome, fatherly thing that now felt like a cruel joke. My dad, needing to check some blueprints or supplier lists, had borrowed the iPad. Instead of spreadsheets and schematics, his finger tapped on the familiar green icon of the iMessage app, perhaps intending to send a quick note. The screen refreshed, and there it was. Not a message he expected, but a cascade of images. A name he knew intimately next to previews that made his blood run cold. His breath lightly hitched, his mind struggling to reconcile the daughter he knew with the woman displayed on the screen. A string of minute photos, my body laid bare for his friend, for him to see. Interspersed were our messages, a sordid transcript that spelled out in excruciating detail exactly what had been happening behind his back, under his nose. He didn't call. He didn't yell. There were no furious accusations, no immediate confrontation that might have, in some twisted way, been easier to bear. The silence was a prelude to a different kind of storm. He came to my cramped, dingy apartment the next morning, unannounced. The hesitant knock on the door sent a jolt of unease through me. I wasn't expecting anyone. I opened it, still bleary-eyed and disheveled, and the sight of him stole the breath from my lungs. It wasn't rage that contorted his features, not the explosive anger I had braced myself for. It wasn't even disgust, though I saw a flicker of something akin to it deep in his eyes. It was something far worse, a profound, shattering heartbreak. The kind that ages a man in an instant. His shoulders, usually so broad and strong, seemed to slump. "I thought I failed you when you dropped out of university," he said, his voice raspy, each word seemingly dragged from a place of immense pain. I blamed myself, wondered what I could have done differently. He paused, his gaze sweeping over my face, searching for something I couldn't give him. "But this is something else, Sarah. This is a betrayal I don't know how to understand." My throat seized, a band of ice tightening around my windpipe. Words formed, clawed their way up, but dissolved into ash before they could reach my lips. My feet felt welded to the peeling linoleum, each crack a mirror of the fractures in my life. The air between us, once filled with easy affection and shared history, now crackled with unspoken accusations and irreparable damage. It was as if a delicate glass sculpture representing our relationship had been dropped and had shattered into a million unforgiving pieces on the floor at our feet. I just stood there, mute and paralyzed, as the weight of his disappointment crushed me. He looked at me one last time, a long, searching look that I will carry with me to my grave, then turned and left without another word. The click of the door closing behind him was the loudest sound I had ever heard. Ken tried to call me later that day, his name flashing on my phone screen like a beacon of my own destruction. I let it ring, the sound grating on my already frayed nerves. He texted a string of increasingly frantic messages. He was sorry. He hadn't meant for it to go this far, for Dad to find out. He still cared about me, he claimed. Empty words. I never replied. What was there to say? And now, I live with the suffocating weight of every choice I made. Not just the sex for money, not just the degrading photos and videos, but the insidious silence. The slow, steady surrender of my self-respect. The countless moments when I could have screamed for help, reached out to someone, anyone, and chose the corrosive secrecy instead. I know people will judge me. Some already have, their whispers and sidelong glances like tiny, sharp needles. But I'm not telling this story for their sympathy or for their absolution. I'm telling it because sometimes, when you're drowning in desperation, survival can look terrifyingly like self-destruction. The lines blur, the choices narrow, and you cling to a makeshift raft cobbled together from compromise and shame. Each wave of necessity threatening to drag you under into the very abyss you fought to escape. No matter how rotten it timbers or how certainly it promises to eventually fail. And by the time you realize the difference, by the time you see the wreckage you've made of your life and the lives of those around you, it's often far, far too late.